that time, I began to have something very interesting happen. Because from the book, I had remembered Baba's name would start to come into my mind. And I didn't know why. But yet, when I would be at school, and especially during the breaks, Baba's name would just come like a repetition into my mind. And I didn't really understand why. Because I didn't really connect, relate to Baba as being, anyone, really personal in my life, although he was someone that was helping many, many people. But why would his name keep coming into my mind? However, I noticed only one thing, that when his name kept coming in during the days to follow, it came with a wonderful feeling. And the feeling was so good that I kind of enjoyed, the repetition of Baba's name that would come again and again and again. In the meantime, as some weeks went by, I received a telephone call from my brother Erwin. And in the telephone call, Erwin says that, he says, Edward, I've read the book, God Speaks, and the things Baba says about the journey of the soul and the experiencing of God. And he said, what I've come to realize after reading about Baba is that what he says is that he has the highest experience of God, and that what he does is only one thing that he really does, and that's to give. His whole purpose is to give, awaken that experience in another where they too can experience God. And he said, Eddie, I think it would be a wonderful thing, if we could, maybe you would like to come and we could work something out where we could visit Baba in India. So I thought about that, and I recollected what I'd read and Baba's name coming into my mind. I said, I think that'd be a wonderful thing. So at that time, as he said, well, I'm going to see what I can do as far as getting the money together, and you see what you can do, and we can make this trip to Meherabad. So in the meantime, my brother had written Meherabad and said that he would like to see him. And Baba said to him at that time that if he wanted to come, he could come, but it would only be for an hour. And if he wanted to do that, then he was welcome, to come at a designated time. So as time went on, so Erwin at that point was trying to see what he could do to get the money in New York City. Anyhow, it wasn't working out in New York, so he said, I'm going to come to Miami and I'm going to see what I can do there. Maybe I can make some more money there, and then we could go see Mayor Baba. And in the meantime, my brother came. He came back to Miami, and I thought, maybe I'll write to Baba. And so I wrote to Baba, and I said basically what I said to Baba in this here, in this note, that I believed him to be. I believe you to be the avatar. And then Baba said to me, he sent back a letter, and in the letter he says, you and Erwin should both come to see me in India. So I received this here, and I said, wow, Baba wants us both to come now. And so then, in the meantime, we were trying to figure out how to get the money. So we came up with a plan and an idea of how to get this money. And anyhow, to really try to shorten the story a little bit more, I won't go through all the things of how the money came about, things like that. But we had accumulated the funds to go, and then at that time we got our tickets and got as far as the airport, and at that time at the airport, my father had somehow gotten wind that we were both leaving for India, and when he had heard that we were leaving to India, he wasn't happy about that at all, and he had his own plan on his end as to what to do about this situation. So when Erwin and I arrived at the airport, there was two men that came over to us, and said, we'd like to see you for a little bit, we need to talk to you. So anyhow, we went with them, and we went into this here. It was a small room, and they asked us a few questions as to, like where we were going, and then we explained to them we're going to India, and they said why, and then we said for spiritual reasons and things like that, and so anyhow, they went out this door, and then they came in and they said, well, it wouldn't. We don't think that you should go to India. That this is really a good idea, and besides, what you should do is that whatever monies you have, you should hand it over to us. And so we said, no, we're not handing over anything to you because the money is ours, and this money is going to India. So they went out the door again. Then they came back and they said, it's not a good thing at this time because if there's anything wrong about the money or anything that's going on, if you hand it over to us, then that's all you got to do, and then everything will be all right. So we said, no, we're not handing the money over to you because this goes for India. So they went out the door, and then the door flings open, and my father stands there, and he says, look at them, 2 con men, thieves, he says. And then they look at my father, and they said to him, and he says, there's only one place that people like this should go, and that he says the jail. And they looked at him, the jail, and they want to know, well, what's the charge? And then he says, you see this one over here? He says, this is the older one, and this is the younger one. And they says, yes, but what's the charge? He says, well, because he's older, he's the one who's kidnapping him and taking him out of the country. And then they suddenly realize, my God, this is a family problem. And they said, Mr. Locke, they said, as far as them going to jail and a kidnapping charge, maybe what you should really do is go somewhere and talk to them and, just straighten this thing out. He says, you can't straighten people like this out. There's something wrong with them. And he says, I'll prove it to you. He says, listen, everything will be all right. Just turn over the money to me, your passports and everything you got, and everything will be fine. And we said to him, no. And he says, see, I told you, they are crazy. They actually belong not in jail, but in a mental asylum. And they say, Mr. Locke, I don't know what you're going to do, but I don't think this is the place for them, and maybe you should just go somewhere with them. He says, go somewhere with them? He says, I can talk to them, but I tell you, it won't do any good. Nothing will change. But I'll do it anyhow, because the situation is helpless here. So then we left with my father, and we went to a hotel. And anyhow, so it went on that my brother, Erwin, it turned out that my father said to me, he said, it was about a day, a good part of a day had gone by, and he said, Erwin isn't eating. So anyhow, I'll start to skip a few things to the point of, because time I know is only so much time to be here. So anyhow, there came the point in time when at that time, my father stood in the way of me going because I was underage, and Erwin had gone on ahead. And but this is an interesting part, because my brother said to me, he said, my father says he's only going to let one of us go. However, if you want to come, maybe we can do something. I said, I don't know. He's so dead set against us going, but as long as he said that you can go ahead, then at least one of us can go, and then I'll follow up and figure a way, that I can also get there. So Erwin went on ahead, and at that time, when Erwin was with Baba, he was with Baba a good part of a week. And at that time, when Erwin was with Baba, I began to have a very unusual, different type of an experience. Because what I would do is usually from the house, I would walk over to the beach and go for these walks. But when I would go for the walks, I noticed I was starting to have this experience of this presence of God. And I was really surprised because I never had experienced any type of, would you say, a spiritual presence. But it was very, very strong. And so each day the presence got stronger and stronger. And it got so strong that when I had gone by the beach, this is the first time I became aware that other people were aware that I was experiencing something. And so one of my friends, when they were approaching me, they were maybe about 70 feet from me. And he looked at me and he hollers out, he says, "Ed, you're glowing!" and then for the first time, I said, it looks like, people can sense something is different. And then the following day, another friend of mine came and he said, and he looked at me also from a distance and he said, "Ed, you're radiating." And this other friend says, "Oh yes, he glows these days." And I was very, very surprised because now I realize other people can feel this presence of God that I'm experiencing. I mean, they sense something. So then one other thing had occurred. And in the meantime, I was wondering, where is the power of this presence of God coming from? Because I don't know anything about meditations or have ever had any kind of spiritual instructions or anything connected to God. So how is it that I'm experiencing this tremendous presence? So at that point, a telegram came for me. And when the telegram came, my mother said, "You have a telegram from India." So I read the telegram, and in the telegram it said, "Time and distance mean nothing to me, and that you will benefit equally the same as if you were in India." And I thought to myself, oh, so that's how this thing is happening. Baba says time and distance mean nothing to him and to benefit. And I says, and this experience is somehow Baba is doing something where he's reached me more than halfway around the world in an invisible way, where I'm experiencing this presence of God now. And I was actually amazed at that time to suddenly become aware that, because I had no idea, to me Baba was an advanced soul in India, but not someone that, in other words, could reach anyone at any distance or anything like that. And then it occurred to me, I suddenly started to remember some of the things Baba had said in the book. He said, "I am infinite consciousness. This body that I have is only a coat, but what I really am is really, in my consciousness, I'm really everywhere and in everything." And I thought to myself at that point, oh, so this is what is meant by a master having infinite consciousness, that he's something much more than the body that I had been thinking he was in India. So that was a tremendous reality awakening for me through that direct experience. So then right after that, I knew now how this was happening. And then shortly right after that, the following day, a little boy, there were two little tiny children on the beach that were playing. They must have been about maybe 6, 7 years old. That's about all. And one of them came over to me, and I was sitting just kind of like squatted in the sand, and one of them came over to me and piggyback style just got around, put their arms around my neck and put their feet around me and just stayed right there for maybe about 2 minutes, and I could just feel them that they were absorbing this tremendous power of the spiritual presence that was just vibrating through my whole body. and then the child got off, and then his brother came over, and then he got on my back with his arms around me, piggyback style, and he just went, just like his brother, completely still, where everything stopped, and I could just feel that he was just absorbing and absorbing and absorbing. And then gradually he let go, and then with his brother continued on, you know, just playing in the sand. And then it struck me for the first time that really that other people that Baba's presence can be felt through people. And that was another tremendous awakening for me, how a master can do things which was totally foreign to me at that time. And then there was just one other instance that I can recall. When I was walking back from the beach, and there was a couple that passed me. And when they passed, they completely turned around and just looked at me, came still and just looked at me. And then they turned back around, and then they continued walking. And then once again I realized that it seems that Meher can reach people invisibly through a person if he so wishes. And I mean, that was my impression of what had happened in that moment in time. Then, of course, my brother came back from India, and I asked him how things were, how they went, and he was he wasn't talking. And I was very surprised. He says, you know, here he's been with Baba for close to a week, and he's not talking. So I says, Earl, how is it like being with Baba? And he only had one thing to say. He says, I didn't get realization of God. I says, you didn't get it? He says, yes. He says, Baba did not give me the experience of God, and that's why I was there. And then he went silent. And then I had more of an idea of what Irwin, of the experience of God, what it really meant to my brother. And he was very, very upset. So I says to him, well, I understand. I says, well, he says to me, you know, this isn't over yet, Ed. And he says, what do you mean? He says, we're going back. And I says, yeah, we're going back. Yes, we'll go. He says, as a matter of fact, you know, as soon as we get word from Baba that he'll be seeing people, you know, we'll figure something out. But this time, you know, we'll do it in a way where my father doesn't know anything, and then he won't be able to stop. He won't be able to stop either one of us. And because now we really understood where my father stood. So that was the experience of where my father stood. As far as my mother, she was totally neutral. You know, if we wanted to see Baba, that was fine with her. You know, she didn't see any harm in that. So anyhow, let's see, it's 4:30. Well, it's about 5:30, so I've been here close to about an hour. So maybe sometime we could continue the talk or something like that. And
good.
If you have it in you, it's wonderful.
Okay, I'll speak a little more. If anyone has to leave, they have to be somewhere, I'll speak a little more, and then if they want me to speak again, then I'll continue on, because I'll be here for another 3 days or so, or 3 or 4 more days. Okay.
Tell us about your meeting, Bob.
Okay, yes. Okay, so in the meantime, I should say that I'll just maybe backtrack a little bit. When I had my awakening of Baba, actually it was through a photograph that my brother sent to me. I'll just go back a little bit. And when he sent me this photograph of Baba and it had a few things that Charles Purdom had written about his meeting of Meherabad. And anyhow, when I had this little picture with his little biography of his experiences of Baba, and I kind of noticed, I said, you know, Baba, there's something very special about Baba's face. And then, but I would forget about it, but each time I came into my room, I would see this little brochure that my brother sent me, and I would notice there's something about Baba's face that's very, very unique, and I should know more about it. So I decided what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit down one day and really take a look at this picture to see exactly what this really is. So one day, I sat down. I said, I'm going to know now. Now is the time I'm going to figure this thing out, what it is about Baba's face that's very special. So I sat down, and I looked at it, and nothing, I couldn't see really anything unusual other than a photograph, of a face of a man, and what I had read in the book, Listen to Humanity, and a little bit of what Charles Purdom had said. And then I looked at it, and then I began to see something. And it wasn't, what I began to see, I should first say, it wasn't anything where Baba's picture became like three-dimensional, or I was having any kind of out-of-the-body experience of Baba. It was still, what I saw was directly from my impression of the picture, the photograph. So what I began to see, the first thing I says, my God, he's suffering. And then the more I looked at the picture of Baba's face, and the lines on his face and his eyes, I says his eyes are just filled with this enormous suffering. And I couldn't believe the pain that this man is carrying is monumental. I says, Jesus, if anyone is suffering, I says, this man really suffers. And then I looked at it, and then I says, this suffering is pure, though. And I says, he's not suffering for anything for himself that he wants for himself. This is for everything that he wants to give. He wants to give to the world, to people. And I said, but people, and I suddenly realized the kind of pure, what he had such purity, that the people to receive what he was trying to give, it was like it would take, it can only be given a little bit at a time to people, or people, it was something that as much as he wanted to give, there was so much resistance from humanity as to what he wanted to give, and this was like caused him such intense pain, agony, that it went right into me where I says, this is a crucifixion. I says, this pain is nothing more than a man that's being crucified continuously. And then I said, oh, so this is the Christ suffering. And I'd heard about that from people, about the Christ suffering. I didn't know really anything much about it other than what I heard that people that had that belief. And I said, oh, so this is the Christ, and he's suffering. And this is the Christ suffering. And at that point, it clicked. And I said, you're here again. And in that, meaning behind those words, you're here again, what I was experiencing was that pure divine love that is God. I said, so this is God. And at that point, I thought to myself, wow, he's here. And all I remember is I got up, and I left the room, and I had the experience that I had that God was here in a human form. And then I left the room. I don't recall thinking much more about that, other than that I knew who he was. When I read the book, I didn't understand terms like, what a master is or what an avatar is. These were all strange terms to me, very foreign. So there's a lot in the book I didn't understand. However, at the same time, so when my brother called me later on, there were some experiences that had touched me, although it wasn't anything that I dwelt or was dwelling on or even thought about, because to me he was in India. He was somewhere far, far away in a form, and that's all I knew. I didn't know anything about that he could reach a person anywhere, or what infinite consciousness was, or anything like that. Or the body was a code that he used, because I didn't even know what this was when I was reading all these things. I didn't know what that was. I had no, would you say, people that perhaps had a mystical experience would have knowledge and insight as to what these words really meant. They weren't yet revealed to me. So anyhow, that was my first experience of Baba. So later on, when I was with Baba, I will say, in kind of ending this time talking, that when I did meet Baba, it wasn't like I was going to meet Baba to see if he is God or like that, because I already had my experience of that. And so, in that sense, that anybody that's had like their inner awakening of Baba has had that experience of Baba being God. So when I saw Meherabad, I had the inner experience of Baba as God, and also had the fantastic opportunity to see God in human form, but with the inner awakening that I had previous of Baba. And without that, as I had seen many people that came for Baba, without that inner experience, what they saw was someone obviously that was like advanced, an advanced soul or something, but like that. So many came to Baba, but without that inner awakening. It didn't mean that they wouldn't be having that at some point in time, but it wasn't destined at that time. So anyhow, many people that, so I stand with many people that have never met Baba, that have, where my experience was not when I came to India or anything like that. My experience was previous to that. And without that, I would have been before Baba, but it would have been totally different, the experience of Baba at that time. Anyhow, so as to kind of cut this thing short, I will say one thing, that when Baba said, a person doesn't necessarily have to be with him to experience and have his love blessings or anything like that. Because, he said, with me, it doesn't matter whether a person's in the body, out of the body, whether there are any distance, this does not matter. And as a matter of fact, he had gone as far as to say, one time, it's not your love for me that matters, but my love for you that counts. And so in that respect, Baba made it very, very clear that anyone that comes to him, or how he works with anyone, whether they met him physically or not, it's irrelevant. I came to know of Meherabad in 1959. And interestingly enough, at that particular year, my brother Erwin had asked me if I would like to go to this talk, and where people would be coming, and they would get together, and I said to him, a talk? My brother Erwin had never ever asked me to go, I don't recall, anywhere with him, and now he was asking me to go to a talk. And I said, well, what is the talk about? And he said, well, Edward, some people think that this is all illusion. I said, is that right? You actually think this is illusion? He said, yes, Eddie. And I said to him, well, that's the talk. And he said, yes, Eddie, we're going to find out more about everything being illusion. So I said, well, I don't know if I'm really interested. However, he said to me, he said, well, listen, I'll tell you what. If you're not doing anything later on this evening, then we'll go to the talk. So I said, all right, sure. If I'm not doing anything, then, let me know. So it came at the time of the evening, and at that time I was not doing anything special or anything like that. And he came over to me and he said, well, Edward, are you interested in going to the talk? Are you doing anything? And I said, well, not really. And he says, well, come on, we'll go to the talk. So off we were to the talk. And it was in a big convention center at that time. And I sat down with the people there, and it was a talk that had to do with Edgar Casey's, who was talking about his father, Hewlin. Hewlin was the son, and Edgar Casey was the father that had passed on, and now he was talking about his great psychic works of his father. And anyhow, he spoke about his father and things like that, and apparently he had a very unique state of consciousness where if anyone was ill, he could tell exactly what the remedy was, whether they were with him or at a distance or things like that. Then also, at this talk, he discussed about his father, that someone once asked him about the nature of God. And his father, in a trance-like state, would be able to answer all these questions, although he was never conscious of what he was saying at the time. So anyhow, his son, as he was speaking about his father and the foundation and all the different mysteries of life, was interjected that his father had experienced what is referred to as the light, and that his father had the light, and therefore, in the experience of the light, he had this knowledge. So, interestingly enough, at one point during the talk, he said, if anybody has, any questions, they should write it down on a piece of paper. And then it will be handed up to me, and I'll read the paper, and I'll answer, and I'll respond to whatever it is that's on the piece of paper if it's in the form of a question. So anyhow, my brother and I were sitting there, and people had given in their pieces of paper, and I saw my brother had, he had been writing something down, and I says, oh, he's got a question, and he handed it up forward. Anyhow, so then Hugh Lin read my brother's question. And as he started to read it, I noticed there was a change in his facial expression. And the question was, have you seen the light? And my brother said, that's my question. And Hugh Lin, at that point, I saw his face start to get red. And he said, of course I've seen the light. He says, you think I would be sitting here unless I've seen the light? If I hadn't seen the light, I would be a phony. He says, I've taken hot showers, I've taken cold showers, and yes, I have seen the light. And he got so angry, I started to shake in my seat. I said, I don't care what he's seen. He hasn't seen anything. Maybe his father did, but not him. So anyhow, that was my first exposure about hearing about the light. And it made such an impression upon me that there was this thing called the light. So later on, I became very curious about this thing called the light. And I had gone on to New York City at that time. I had been living in Miami with my brother, Erwin. And anyhow, in New York City, I began to wonder what this experience of the light was. Because it didn't seem to be an ordinary mundane experience. And so in curiosity, I'd gone into a church one time in New York. And at that time, I was about 19. And in the church, a man who was a minister came over to me. And he said to me, he says, do you have any questions? And I said to him, yes, I do. I says, do you know anything about the light? And at that time, he says, as a matter of fact, there was a friend of mine that had seen the light. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, he experienced the light, and in the experience of the light, he was in harmony with everyone and everything. And whatever problem came up, he knew exactly how to deal with it. But then he said, later, as time went by, about a year or so, he began to misuse the power of the light. And then the light withdrew. And then after that, he says he's been pursuing the light ever since. So I thought to myself, I said, well, that's very interesting that there's someone else that, that knows about this thing called the light. And as time went on, I became more and more curious about this here, that there was something higher. And at that time, I remembered something also that Hewlin had said that his father had in that experience access to what is known as the universal mind. And that when you're in touch with that universal mind, you can know anything. So I realized that there was a great deal then more to this experience of the light than that people could experience. So in my curiosity about this here, I had a sense that this had to do something that I knew so little about. So I asked someone, I said, does this have something to do with gaining some kind of contact with God? And they said, well, Eddie, yes. They said, what you need to do then is read the book of Saint Teresa. And I said, Saint Teresa? And they said, yes, she had an experience where she could talk to God. So I got a book on Saint Teresa at that time, and then I began to realize, yeah, well, she seemed to be experiencing some kind of, more than anything, like this ecstasy. And I thought to myself, well, that's really nice, but what I want to really know more about the light and how you can get this experience of God and be able to even talk to Him. So I decided that this is what I'm going to do. I mapped out a plan for myself. At that time, I was working in New York City as an usher in the New York Palace Theater. So one day, I decided this is what I got to do to make the contact with God. I'm going to close the shades of the room that I've rented, that I live in. And then suddenly I realized, well, wait a second, the room, even if you pull down any shades, there's all buildings in front of every single window. So the room is dark as it is. So all I have to do is turn off the light and the room would be dark. So I turned off the light and I was in the pitch black. And at that point, I started to just open myself up for my experience to connect with God and to have that contact. And so I sat in the room, and I sat, and I sat, and then nothing happened, and then suddenly I said, it doesn't seem like anything is happening in here. And I want to know if I can get this contact with God and have this experience of this light. So then, as I sat in the room, suddenly it was like a buzzing going on in the room. And I says, gee whiz, there's something going on in the room and I can't see anything because it's pitch black. But then I started to feel a lot of movement going on. And then I began to wonder what this movement is. And suddenly I realized it seems like there's people in the room. And I began to think, wow, this room has got people in it and I don't even know who they are. And that's what it felt to me at that time. And there was more and more coming in, and finally I tried to think, my God, I'm trying to have a contact with God, and all this other stuff is going on in the room. And the thing that got me at a certain point is that all these things were there, and I said, this has nothing to do with God, and besides, they're not even paying rent, and what are they all doing here? And I said, I want God. And then the room, I tell you, the room cleared out. It cleared completely out. And then I was just sitting in the room feeling very safe again. Believe I felt very, very safe. Now, I didn't understand what had happened because I never experienced anything like this in my entire life. So anyhow, I sat there and I began to think, it doesn't seem like anything is happening. And I've been here, gee whiz, it's almost 3 hours now. And I thought, my God, and I was thinking, I'm supposed to be at work about an hour ago, and here I am waiting to connect with God, and nothing here seems to be happening, and it's been 3 hours. So then a thought occurred to me that I had remembered someone saying, well, in a book, that if nothing happens at the time, then maybe what is meant is that it's supposed to happen later. So I figured I'm one of these people that it's supposed to happen later. So anyhow, I turned the light on, I went to my job, and I was thinking, wow, they're going to probably wonder, where I've been. And so I went on to my job, put on my usher uniform, then went upstairs to my station where I patrol the different aisles and everything, along with there's another usher there who usually works the machines, trying to get change out of machines that people forgot to take. And he was there as usual doing that. And he was busy with that. I says, what are you doing? He says, I'm trying to get the change that people leave. And then I realized he doesn't even know that I was gone. And then I realized nobody knows the manager. Nobody knew that I never showed up for work, and here I am an hour late. And then I said, for the first time, I says, maybe there's something to this thing of God, because there seems to be some kind of a power where they're completely oblivious that I was gone while I was trying to make this contact with God. So then, a short while later, came the time when I thought, well, maybe I'll go to a library and I'll get a book and give myself, something to read. So I went to the New York Public Library. And when I went into the library, I thought, well, maybe, show business is a very interesting thing. So maybe what I can do is get a book that'll help me with memorizing lines. So, because I figured, well, I don't have a good memory, and if I should ever get a part, I'll be able to know how to remember lines, some kind of technique. So I thought, yes, the Indians. The Indians can stick pins in their face, through their nose. They can hold their breath. They can, for hours, they can bury themselves. They can do all kinds of things. So I thought, well, maybe they must have a technique for memorizing lines. And this is what came to me, of all things. I got this stroke of enlightenment. Where to go for the technique. So then I went to the Indian section for the Indian books, and I came across this one book that had had to do with India, and the name of it was called Listen Humanity. And I looked at that book, Listen Humanity, and I got very struck at the title. I mean, I completely forgot about memorizing anything or about India or these things, and I says, gee whiz, this man has titled his entire book in big letters, Listen Humanity. And I thought to myself, I says, oh my God, this man really wants somebody to listen. And I says, gee whiz, if he can title that book, Listen Humanity, I says, I'll do it. I'm gonna listen to nobody else. I heard you. So then I opened up the book. And in opening up the book, first I saw the picture of Baba, and there he had a garland on. I said, oh, looks like a man from Hawaii. Someone that might even have a harem, just these little thoughts that kind of like flickered through my mind. And then I started to read. And in reading, I started to become quickly aware. I read about maybe 5 pages. And it had to do with someone that had a state of experience of God, and at the same time could instruct people individually when he spoke to them to the very point of what would help each one in their spiritual progression in their life. And I thought to myself as I was reading some of these things, I says, if anyone did any of these things that of his guidance, they couldn't help but become a better person for it. And then I recalled something about the universal mind and how if you have that universal mind, you can have all knowledge. except the only difference was that Baba didn't have to go in, he wasn't in a trance to be able to communicate to people what it is that would help them in their journey. So I said, wow, Baba, this man experiences the light. And at that point I thought, wow, that's really far out. You know, that here's someone that can actually help people from a spiritual point of view. And I thought to myself, well, you know, maybe I should get this book. Because if I get the book, you know, it could possibly, you know, could even help me. And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, wait, help me? And I said, wait a second, Dada, you know, you don't even have a library card. You got to get a library card. You just can't walk out with a book. And then I thought, I says, yeah, that's right, you know. But, you know, they're going to ask you questions, Edward, you know, like your name, your address, and you're going to have to fill out a whole form, you know, and do you want to do that? And then I thought, well, Edward, what do you know about truth? And I said, well, I don't know anything about truth. And then my thoughts, the next thoughts that followed right behind that, and they said, well, if you don't know anything about truth, how can you possibly afford to go through life and know nothing about truth? And I thought about that. That's right, I got a whole life, and not to know anything about truth would be a very sad thing, you know, to happen for me, to miss out on something like this. And I said, well, you might have to get that library card then. And I said, but the book is a very thick book. And that book weighs, and I'm going to have to carry it maybe 10 blocks. And I thought about that, and I said, well, you have to think, you know, if you don't know anything about truth, you can still go through life, you know nothing, and be ignorant, so you got to make a choice. So I said, well, maybe I should get the book. I said, so then I went to the librarian, and I went over to her, and she just said to me, she says, well, just sign here. So I signed my name, and then she says, now here's your library card, and now you can take the book. And I said, for how long? She says, you can have it for about a week. And in there, they'll tell you when the date is up. So then, of course, then I took the book home, and I started to the apartment, and I started to read it. And the more I read it, the more fascinated I became with it spoke in terms of reincarnation, and that if a person they can gain all knowledge, but it requires a number of lives to go through. And that made a lot of sense to me, that if a person had the opportunity of many lives, then they could know a great deal. Because I couldn't see myself knowing everything in one life. So I said, wow, then there is something about reincarnation that's very important then. And so anyhow, then as I was reading the book, I came to almost the completion of the book at that time. And then I decided, well, this is really something. And I got very excited, and I said, you know, I'm going to call my brother Erwin in Miami. And I said, you know, he may be interested in something like this. And the reason why, I was taking a very wild guess at this here, because before I left Miami, he was growing a beard. And this is not like Erwin to grow a beard. And I knew he kind of like distanced himself from people and was spending more time reading and just being by himself. So I kind of like figured, well, maybe he's looking for something. You know, he seems to be, he's searching, so I'll call him and let him know about this here. So I called up Miami, and then my brother got on the phone. I says, this is your brother, Edward, and there's something I need to tell you. And Erwin says, well, what is that? I says, there's a book called Listen Humanity that I think you'll be very interested to read, because, you know, I notice you seem to be looking for something, so you should read this book. So at that time, so Erwin asked, who is the book by? So I said something like Meher So he couldn't get the name. He said, Maba, something. I said, no, Meher. And he said, Maba? And so he couldn't get the name. So finally he put my mother on the phone. And so to understand what the name was. So I said the name Meherabad. So she understood it right away. So she said to me, he says, Mayor Baba. So my brother got back on the phone and says, okay, she knows the name now, so I'll see about if I can get the book and see what this book is about. So then we hung up. Then I didn't hear anything from my brother, and then I decided at that point that for this year, maybe what I got to do to gain this contact with God is to go into maybe a monastery. If I go into a monastery, then I can be alone, because I had read where this one guy, he spent 10 years in a monastery, and after 10 years, he established a contact with God. So I said, well, maybe that's what I need to do. I need to go into a monastery. I said, but they have all these rituals and religions, so how are they going to leave me alone so I can just be alone and just keep focusing till I get that contact? I says, no, they're gonna try with their indoctrinations and everything else, and their rituals, and their singing, and their hymns, and all of that, and they'll never leave me alone. So I don't know if they have a monastery, the kind that I would need, where they leave you totally alone to yourself. Okay, so anyhow, so then I thought to myself, well, I still have to find this experience with God. So at that time, I had gone out to a few different agencies in terms of show business, to see maybe I can get a part as an actor. So in the meantime, I was planning on thinking, well, what's my next move to gain a contact with God? Okay, so then what followed right after that was that a producer came and sought me out. And he said, listen, I know you, I've seen you a little bit, and what I'd like is to put you, I have 5 movies I'm going to be producing. And it's going to require traveling to a lot of different countries. So, and I have a part in each movie for you. So if you want to come, then it would really be good. And I said to him, well, I've been thinking, which was true, I've been thinking about going to Miami from New York, and then talking with my brother and finding a little more what he was interested in and how to pursue this experience of God. So he said to me, then the producer says, listen, let me know, what do you want to do? Because if you want to be in each movie, I would be very, very happy to have you. So I said, well, I don't know. I'm going to be going home for the holidays, and so I won't be here. He said, well, what I'll do is I could manage to hold up. There's a few things I have to do, and I can hold up the whole crew because I've got all the lighters, the people with the lighting, the directors, the cameras, all the equipment, all the crews all set, but I can hold up everything if I just know that you would be willing to come. And I said, well, I don't know, because at this time I'm going to be leaving. I'm going to be leaving shortly for the holidays. So he said, well, okay, and he gave me his card, and he says, well, if you can contact me in time, let me know, because I'd really like to have you. So anyhow, I took his card, and then within that week, I was off to Miami. Took a flight. I quit my job, took a flight, and I speak to my brother. So, in speaking to my brother Erwin, he said that what he was interested in doing was also gaining this communication with God. And anyhow, so I was there, and I was listening to him, and I says, oh, so you're interested? He says, yes. And as a matter of fact, he said, Edward, I have an intuition that if I go to New York, that I'll gain this contact with God. So he said to me, he says, what I'm going to do right now is tell my father what I'm going to do. That I'm leaving Miami, and I'm going to New York, and I'm going to gain a contact with God there. So he goes over to my father. He says, Dad, guess what? And then he says, what? He says, I'm leaving for New York. He says, you're leaving for New York? He says, why? Why would you leave for New York? He says, everything's fine right here. He says, to get a contact with God. And he says, you're going to New York to get a contact with God? He said, yes. He says, and this is going to be the most important thing. He says, this is going to be the most important thing. What about your father, your mother? What about them? Aren't they important? He says, well, this, if I gain a contact with God, it's going to help everybody. He says, like Moses. You want to be a Moses, and you'll come back with the commandments, and you'll, to help everyone. He says, well, it's not like Moses. He says, I'm not looking to become a Moses just to gain a contact with God. And he says, listen, I have the perfect solution for you. All you need to do is just stay here, and I'll take you to the shul, meaning to the church, and there you can find God like other people do. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, people go to the church, and they pray to God, they're with God, and then you've got God. See, it's very simple, and then you don't have to go to New York. He says, well, my intuition, he says, tells me that it's only going to happen in New York. He says, only in New York? He says, yes, only in New York. That's what the intuition says to me. He says, and he shakes his head, and then he goes to my mother and he says, guess what? He's going to New York to gain a contact. He thinks he's going to talk to God now, and I don't know what to do with him. So my mother's a very quiet woman. She doesn't say anything much. Anyhow, Erwin does go on to New York City, and at that time, what I started doing was finishing up, I went to private school to finishing up my high school at that time. So I had about part of just about a half a year to go, or something like that.